My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed, and my superpower is an almost supernatural ability to read and understand deeply, profoundly boring documents. As a city planner for Charlotte, I spend my days wading through the murky swamps of zoning ordinances, historical plat maps, and environmental impact reports. I am a woman who finds a strange, quiet beauty in the precise, logical, and often archaic language of civic engineering. It is a skill that, until last spring, I had assumed had no practical application in my quiet suburban life. I was wrong. It turns out that my nerdy little superpower was the perfect weapon for a very specific kind of war. And that war began with a B. To be more specific, it began with my desire to save the bees. When I bought my house in Willow Creek Estates, a meticulously planned subdivision of immaculate beige-colored homes, I had inherited a front lawn of perfect chemically treated and ecologically useless turf grass. It was a green desert, so I, in my quiet, methodical way, had declared war on it. I spent a year ripping it out, amending the soil, and cultivating a beautiful, chaotic, and defiantly living garden of native North Carolina wildflowers. By this spring, it was a masterpiece. A miniature meadow of purple coneflowers, black-eyed, Susans, and brilliant orange butterfly weed, all interspersed with the soft, flowing textures of native grasses. It was a riot of color and life, a constant buzzing hub of activity for the local pollinators. I would sit on my front porch with my morning coffee and watch the fat, fuzzy bumblebees stumble drunkenly from flower to flower, their legs dusted with gold. My garden was the one place in my life that was not governed by grids and regulations. It was my small, wild act of defiance against the sterile conformity of my neighborhood. And my neighbors, for the most part, loved it. People would stop on their evening walks to compliment it. But there was one person who did not love it, and her opinion, unfortunately, was the only one that was legally binding. At least within the petty kingdom of Willow Creek Estates. Her name was Brenda Clark, and she was the president-treasurer, and self-appointed supreme commander of our Homeowners Association. Brenda was a woman in her 50s who wielded her power with the grim, unwavering certainty of a religious zealot. Her Bible was the 300-page book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and she had memorized every verse she would patrol. The neighborhood in her crisp white tennis skirt, a clipboard clutched in her hand, her eyes scanning for violations, a trash can left out an hour too late, a basketball hoop with a slightly frayed net, a garden gnome she deemed aesthetically inappropriate. She was a tyrant of taupe, a dictator of domesticity, and she hated my garden with a passion that was almost biblical in its intensity. Our first interaction was a passive-aggressive drive-by. I was on my knees, happily weeding a patch of milkweed, when she power-walked past on the sidewalk, talking loudly on her phone. "I know, Gladys," she said, her voice carrying across my yard. "It's just so disheartening. Some people move into a premier community like this and have absolutely no respect for the established standards. No respect for property values at all." She had never once made eye contact with me. The first official salvo arrived in my mailbox a week later. It was a crisp white envelope with the Willow Creek Estates logo embossed in the corner. Inside was a single, professionally printed sheet of paper. Official notice of violatio in property. 115 Willow Creek Drive date. May 12, 2025, Dear Dr. Reed. This letter serves as a formal notice that your property is in violation of the Willow Creek Estates, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Violation, Article 4, Section 3. Subsection A. All front-facing non-wooded yard areas must be maintained with a uniform, cultivated turf grass, for example. Fescue, Bermuda, zoysia, mowed to a height, not to exceed 3 inches. Your front yard is currently planted with a non-conforming mixture of weeds, wildflowers, and other unapproved vegetation. Action required, you have 33 days from the date of this notice to remove the unapproved vegetation and install a compliant turf grass lawn. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100, and further fines will be levied for continued noncompliance. Sincerely, Brenda Clark. President W.C. Ho read the letter, a slow, hot flush of anger creeping up my neck. Weeds, wildflowers, and other unapproved vegetation. She was talking about my carefully curated ecosystem. I was a city planner. I was a logical, reasonable person. Kay believed that any disagreement could be solved with a calm, rational presentation of the facts. I assumed Brenda was simply uninformed, so I wrote a letter back. A beautiful letter. It was polite, professional, and deeply educational. I explained the ecological benefits of native plant gardens. I cited the City of Charlotte's own GO Green initiative, which encouraged homeowners to create pollinator-friendly yards. I attached a peer-reviewed article from a university. Agricultural extension about the dangers of monoculture lawns and pesticide runoff. I even, in a gesture of community goodwill, offered to give a presentation on sustainable landscaping at the next quarterly HOA meeting. I was treating her not as an adversary, but as a colleague who simply needed more data to make an informed decision. I sealed the envelope, a self-satisfied smile on my face, and mailed it to the HOA's PO box. Brenda's response arrived 2 weeks later. It was another crisp, white envelope. It did not contain a thoughtful reply to my well-reasoned arguments. It contained an invoice. INVO ISEP property. 115 Willow Creek Drive fine for violation of Article 4. Section 3, a lawn maintenance, $100. Please remit payment within 14 days. Attached to the invoice was a small pink sticky note. On it, in Brenda's neat, sharp, and utterly infuriating handwriting, were 3 words: "This is not a debate." That was the moment I realized this was not a disagreement. It was a declaration of war. My rational, data-driven approach had failed. My attempt at polite, neighborly education had been dismissed. Brenda Clark was not interested in ecological benefits or peer-reviewed articles. She was interested in one thing and one thing only: power. Absolute, unquestioning, and tyrannical power. I stood there on my porch, holding the invoice in my hand, and I looked out at my beautiful, buzzing, defiant garden. The bees were humming, the butterflies were fluttering, and the purple coneflowers were standing tall and proud in the afternoon sun. Brenda had chosen her battlefield. She thought the war would be fought here, in my front yard, with her flimsy, self-important rulebook as her weapon. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. She had no idea. She was bringing a knife to a gunfight. And I was the one who had written the city's zoning code. My professional life and my personal life had, until now, been 2 separate, distinct worlds. Brenda Clark was about to find out what happened when they collided. My first fine was paid with a check and a note. The check was for $100. The note, attached with a paperclip, was a single polite sentence: paid under protest. Regards, Dr. Evelyn Reed. It was a quiet, passive-aggressive act of defiance, a continuation of the debate Brenda had declared was over. I did not alter my garden. I did not pull up a single coneflower. I was a woman who had spent her entire career navigating the complex, often irrational world of public debate and city council meetings. I was not going to be intimidated by a petty tyrant in a tennis skirt. I would follow the rules. I would pay the fine. And I would wait for her next move. I assumed, with the naive optimism of a person who still believed in reason, that she would eventually get tired and move on to her next victim. I had grossly underestimated the obsessive, single-minded determination of a bored suburbanite. With a taste of absolute power, the fines began to arrive with the rhythmic, unwelcome regularity of the morning newspaper. Every Friday, like clockwork, a new, crisp white envelope from the Willow Creek Estates HOA would be in my mailbox. The second fine was for $150 for continued non-compliance. The third fine was for $200, and it included a new creative charge for accrued administrative fees. She was inventing new ways to punish me. I continued to pay them, each check a small, silent monument to my own stubborn refusal to bend. My garden, in the meantime, was exploding with life, a vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful testament to the cause of our Cold War. Then Brenda escalated. She took the battle from my mailbox to the digital town square, the neighborhood Facebook group. It was a Tuesday evening. I was on my couch, scrolling through my feed, when it appeared. The post was from Brenda Clark, and it was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive public shaming. She had taken a series of unflattering close-up photos of my garden. She had deliberately focused on the patches of native clover I had cultivated as a ground cover, framing them to look like a neglected patch of weeds. She had photographed a milkweed plant from an angle that made its complex, beautiful flowers look like a thorny, alien menace. The caption was a masterwork of concern trolling. "Good evening, neighbors," it began. I just wanted to share a few photos from a property on Willow Creek Drive that has become a subject of great concern for the HOA board. As you know, our covenants are in place to protect the aesthetic integrity and, most importantly, the property values of our beautiful community. When one homeowner decides to let their yard fall into such a state of unkempt disarray, it affects all of us. The board is actively handling this situation, but I just wanted to remind everyone to please be considerate of your neighbors. A little bit of weeding and a regular mowing schedule is all it takes to keep Willow Creek the premier community we all fell in love with. I stared at the post, at the ugly, distorted pictures of my beautiful garden, and I felt a hot, sickening wave of rage and humiliation. She had doxed my yard. She had taken our private dispute and had aired it out for 200 of my neighbors to see. The comments section was a predictable, depressing battlefield. There were the Brenda loyalists, the other members of the Beige Brigade. "Thank you for all your hard work, Brenda. So important to maintain standards." That's just awful. I would be furious if I had to live next to that mess. But then, to my surprise, a defense began to mount. My next-door neighbor, a kind retired man named George, was the first to weigh in. "I live next door to this yard, and I think it's beautiful. My wife and I love watching the hummingbirds and butterflies it attracts. It's 100 times better than another boring patch of grass." Others followed. "Actually, that looks like a native pollinator garden. The city of Charlotte has a program that encourages these. I'll take wildflowers over pesticide-sprayed lawns any day of the week." The post devolved into a vicious, ugly comment war that raged for hours. I just sat there, watching this digital proxy battle being fought over my own front yard, over my own choices. "Brenda, I noted, did not engage with any of the positive comments. She simply let her original accusatory post stand, a public monument to her own manufactured outrage. I did not comment. I did not defend myself. To do so would be to legitimize her tactics. It would be to accept that a neighborhood Facebook group was the proper venue for this debate. I simply took a series of screenshots documenting the entire sordid affair. More evidence for my growing file. The final absolute breaking point came a month later at the quarterly HOA meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, a sterile, soulless building with beige walls, beige folding chairs, and the faint, sad smell of stale coffee. About 30 residents were there, a small, sad collection of the usual complainers and a few people, like me, who had been specifically summoned and shamed on the public agenda. Brenda sat at a long table at the front of the room, flanked by the two other members of the HOA board, a meek-looking treasurer and a secretary who looked terrified of her. Brenda was in her element. She had a gavel, which she had a binder. She had an audience. The first hour of the meeting was a tedious recitation of the budget and a long, rambling report from the Architectural Review Committee, which was just Brenda talking about a recent dispute she'd had with a homeowner. Over the color of their front door, it was linen white instead of the approved antique lace. Then she got to new business, and I was the new business, as many of you are aware. She began, her voice ringing with a deep, false solemnity. We have had an ongoing issue with a property on Willow Creek Drive that is persistent violation of our community's landscaping standards. She did not use my name, but every eye in the room swiveled to me. I could feel the heat of their stares. This is not a simple matter of aesthetics, neighbors. This is a matter of our shared commitment to the values of this community. When we bought our homes here, we all agreed to a certain standard. We agreed to be part of a cohesive, beautiful, and orderly community. And when one person decides that those rules do not apply to them, they are not just neglecting their lawn. They are neglecting their responsibility to all of us. She went on like that for 10 minutes, a long, sanctimonious, and deeply personal attack on my character, all disguised as a defense of their shared property values. She used words like noxious weeds, unruly overgrowth, and a potential haven for vermin. She was not just describing my garden. She was describing me. I was the weed in her perfect manicured lawn of a neighborhood. When she finally finished, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice was calm. Brenda, I began, bang. The sound of her gavel hitting the table was so loud it made me flinch. Dr. Reed, you are out of order, she said, her eyes glinting with a cold, triumphant light. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The public shutdown. This is not a public forum for personal grievances. She continued, her voice a condescending purr. The bylaws are perfectly clear. You have been sent the violation notices. You have been sent the fines. The board has made its decision. If you wish to formally appeal, you must submit a written request to the Architectural Review Committee, and we will consider it at our next meeting. In 3 months, now please sit down. I stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. I, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman who had presented complex urban planning proposals to hostile city councils, a woman who had defended million-dollar environmental impact reports in front of angry developers, was being silenced by a petty tyrant with a gavel in a beige-colored community room. The humiliation was absolute. My attempt to use reason, to have a rational discussion, had been publicly and brutally shut down. I sat down. I did not say another word for the rest of the meeting. I just sat there, my face burning, my mind a cold, quiet, and suddenly very clear machine. I looked at Brenda, at her smug, victorious face. She thought she had one. She thought she had finally, definitively, put me in my place. She had no idea what she had just done. She had not silenced me. She had radicalized me. I walked home from the clubhouse in the cool evening air. The anger, the frustration, the public humiliation, it all began to coalesce into a single, cold, and wonderfully simple thought. You want to talk about rules, Brenda? You want to talk about bylaws and official documents? Fine. Let's talk about the real rules. I was done fighting on her turf. I was done trying to reason with an unreasonable person. I was done with the Facebook groups and the pointless HOA meetings. My new battlefield would not be in my front yard. It would be in the quiet, dusty archives of the city planning department. And on that field, I was not just a resident. I was an expert. And she was a rank amateur. The war was not over. It just begun. The humiliation of the HOA meeting was a strange and unexpected gift. It was a catalyst. The hot, messy, and entirely useless emotions of anger and frustration were burned away in the crucible of that public shaming, leaving behind something clean, hard, and wonderfully cold. Professional purpose. Brenda Clark had made a critical amateur mistake. She had picked a fight with an expert in her own field of expertise. She thought the battlefield was my garden, a place of wildflowers and emotions. She had no idea I was about to move the war to a terrain where I was a god and she was a complete and utter novice. The dusty, labyrinthine archives of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Department. I didn't go home after the meeting. I drove straight to my office downtown. The building was dark and silent on a Thursday night, my security card granting me solitary access to the 16 floors of bureaucratic power that governed every square inch of the city. I took the elevator up to the 8th floor, zoning and land use records. It was a place my colleagues jokingly called the dungeon, a vast climate-controlled room filled with rolling metal shelves. The scent of old paper and microfilm, a kind of sacred incense. To most, it was a place of profound boredom. To me, it was the hall of truth. It was where the real rules were kept. Brenda Clark, in her smug little clubhouse, had her 300-page binder of HOA bylaws. It was her holy text. But I knew that her binder was nothing. It was a work of amateur fiction compared to the volumes of legally binding, cute ordained scripture that were housed in this room. The HOA could govern the color of your mailbox, but the city of Charlotte governed the very existence of your land. Brenda had been fighting me with the rules of a board game. I was about to fight back with the full, crushing weight of the law. My mission was simple. I was not looking for a loophole. I was looking for a mistake in my years as a planner. I had learned a fundamental truth about cities. They are chaotic. Human systems and the records that document their growth are riddled with the small, forgotten errors of decades of human fallibility. A typo in a surveyor's measurement from 1950. A miskeyed parcel number in a 1980s database migration. A hastily passed ordinance from a long-forgotten city council. These were the ghosts in the civic machine, and I was going to find one. Started with the original subdivision plat map for Willow Creek Estates, FILED, in 1984. I unrolled the huge, crackling sheet of paper on a light table. There it was, our neighborhood in its infancy, a neat, optimistic grid of lots and streets carved out of what had once been a dairy farm. I found my own lot, 115 Willow Creek Drive, and I found hers. Lot 1, Block A, a prime corner lot at the main entrance to the subdivision. There were no anomalies. It was a clean, standard residential plat. For the next 2 hours, I sat at my terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my eyes scanning through the city's GIS database. I pulled up the complete, layered zoning history for that specific tract of land. I went through it year by year, ordinance by ordinance, watching the digital map of my neighborhood evolve. I cross-referenced every city-level change with the HOA's own founding documents. It was tedious, painstaking, and deeply satisfying work. I was in a state of pure intellectual flow, a detective hunting for a single, out-of-place clue in a mountain of data. And then, at a little after 1 in the morning, I found it. My heart actually skipped a beat. It was beautiful. A tiny, perfect, and utterly devastating clerical error from 30 years ago. In 1994, the city of Charlotte had undertaken a massive citywide rezoning initiative to modernize its zoning codes for a new comprehensive plan. It was a huge, messy project that had taken years. I pulled up Ordinance 94-112B, the one that affected the district containing Willow Creek. And there, on page 214, in a long, boring list of parcel number redesignations, was the mistake. An entire block of Willow Creek, Block A, which included lots 1 through 12, had been accidentally included in a list of properties being rezoned to NC1, Neighborhood Commercial. Level 1. I felt a slow, cold, and deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. NC21 zoning was for small-scale, low-intensity commercial uses. A coffee shop, a small professional office, a corner store. It was most definitely not for a 3,000-square-foot single-family residence with a perfectly manicured lawn. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I knew there must have been a correction. The residents of the other 11 houses on that block would have surely received notices and raised hell. And there it was, 2 years later. In 1996, Ordinance 9645, a correction ordinance. I scanned the document. It listed the parcels being reverted from NC1 back to their original R1 residential zoning. It listed lots 2 through 12, but it did not list lot 1. It was a typo, a simple, beautiful, and catastrophic typo. Some overworked city clerk 30 years ago had forgotten to type a number. And because of that, for the past 3 decades, lot 1, Block A, the prime corner lot at 112 Willow Creek Drive, the personal beloved home of the HOA president, Brenda Clark, had been, according to the official, legally binding zoning map of the city of Charlotte, a commercial property. I spent the next hour in a state of pure academic bliss, a researcher who has just made a career-defining discovery. I verified everything. I pulled up the current official zoning map. There it was, a tiny, anomalous island of blue commercial. Zoning in a vast sea of yellow residential zoning, a cartographical error that no one had ever noticed. Because why would they? It was a house. It had always been a house. I pulled up the city's land use code. I read the section on non-conforming uses. Her house, having been built before the 1994 error, technically grandfathered in. But the grandfather clause had a fatal weakness. It only applied as long as the use was continuous. If the property were ever sold, or if a new building permit was ever applied for, the grandfathered status would be extinguished. The property would revert to its official underlying zoning. Her home, her castle, The seat of her petty suburban power was sitting on a legal bureaucratic time bomb, and I had just found the detonator. I began to print. I printed the original 1984 subdivision plat. I printed the full text of the 1994 rezoning ordinance with the relevant page highlighted. I printed the 1996 correction ordinance with its glorious, beautiful omission of Lot 1. I printed the current official zoning map with a bright red circle drawn around Brenda's property. I printed the entire section of the city code on NC1 zoning and non-conforming residential uses. I was compiling my arsenal. I was building my case. My revenge would not be a screaming match at an HOA meeting. It would not be a passive-aggressive post on Facebook. My revenge would be a quiet, professional, and utterly soul-destroying petition to the City of Charlotte Zoning and Planning Commission. I would not be a disgruntled resident. I would be Dr. Evelyn Reed, a concerned city planner, who had, in the course of her professional duties, discovered a significant and long-standing discrepancy that required immediate clarification by the city. I looked at the thick, beautiful stack of official documents on my desk. Brenda Clark, in her profound ignorance, believed her. Power came from her little HOA binder. She had no idea that I was the one who had written the books that governed her entire world. She had tried to find me for my wildflowers. I was about to have her entire house declared illegal. It was, I thought with a deep, cold, and profoundly satisfying sense of professional pride, a perfectly proportional response. The weekend after my discovery in the city archives was the first weekend in months that I felt a sense of profound, almost giddy peace. Brenda Clark's weekly fine, which arrived in my mailbox as scheduled that Friday, no longer felt like a harassment. It felt like a joke. I looked at the crisp white envelope, at the self-important HOA logo, and I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. I didn't even open it. I just walked into my home office and slipped it into a new file folder, which I labeled with a deep sense of satisfaction, irrelevant. Brenda was playing checkers, and I was about to overturn the entire chessboard. My revenge would not be a hastily written, emotional letter. It would not be a confrontation on her perfectly manicured lawn. It would be a work of art, a masterpiece of bureaucratic aikido. I would use the very system of rules and regulations that she worshipped, the system that gave her power to utterly and completely dismantle her. My weapon of choice would not be a complaint. Spent my Sunday drafting it. I was not a resident writing an angry letter to the city. I was Dr. Evelyn Reed, a concerned citizen and a professional in the field of urban planning, formally requesting a clarification on a matter of public record that I had, in the course of my own academic research, unearthed. The tone was not angry. It was helpful. It was the tone of a dedicated civil servant, dutifully pointing out a small error in the civic machinery to help the city run more efficiently. It was this helpfulness, I knew, that would make the final blow so much more devastating. I structured the document with the meticulous care of a legal brief. To the City of Charlotte Zoning and Planning Commission from Dr. Evelyn Reed. A page to subject. Petition for zoning map clarification and correction for parcel ID. #04521116. Dear members of the Commission, this petition is submitted to respectfully request a formal review and clarification of the zoning status for the property located at 112 Willow Creek Drive. As a long-term resident of this area and a professional in the field, I have a vested interest in the accuracy and integrity of our city's official zoning maps. I then laid out my findings with cold, hard, and irrefutable facts. I cited the original 1984 residential zoning. I cited Ordinance 94-112B with a specific page and paragraph number. That had rezoned the entire block to neighborhood commercial. I cited Ordinance 96-45, which had corrected the error for every single lot on that block except for one. I attached copies of every document, each one neatly labeled as an appendix, as the official city records clearly indicate. I wrote, "The property at 112 Willow Creek Drive has been legally zoned NC1 Neighborhood Commercial, Level 1 for the past 30 years. The current use of the property as a single-family residence is, therefore, a non-conforming use." And then came the masterstroke. The part that had come to me in a flash of malicious, bureaucratic genius. The part that would not just disarm my enemy, but would turn her own greatest love, her pristine, single-family home-filled neighborhood, against her, while the most obvious course of action would be to revert the parcel to its original R1 residential zoning. I wrote, my fingers dancing across the keyboard, I would like to propose an alternative for the Commission's consideration. The City of Charlotte's own 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which I had the pleasure of contributing to, explicitly calls for the promotion of missing middle housing and increased density in established suburban neighborhoods to combat urban. Sprawled the parcel in question, a large corner lot at the main entrance to the subdivision, is uniquely and ideally situated for such a pilot project. Therefore, I respectfully recommend that the Commission, instead of reverting the zoning, consider a more forward-thinking designation for the property, such as MX2, mixed-use residential. I laid out the beautiful, logical, and utterly terrifying implications of my suggestion. The MX2 designation would allow for a variety of uses that would greatly benefit the community, including a duplex, a triplex, or even a small, tastefully designed apartment building of up to 3 stories. This would provide much-needed housing, diversity, and align perfectly with the city's stated long-term goals. I read the paragraph over and over, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. Brenda's worst nightmare was not a coffee shop being built on her property. It was an apartment building, a place for renters, a direct, mortal threat to the suburban exclusionary paradise she had dedicated her life to protecting. With a single, helpful, and civic-minded suggestion, I had transformed her beloved home into the potential site of the very thing she hated the most. It was poetic. I finished the petition, converted it to a PDF, and attached all my supporting documents. Then I went to the City Planning Department's official website. I found the public portal for zoning petitions. I filled out the required fields, uploaded my beautiful, terrible document, and I clicked submit. There were no fireworks. There was no dramatic music. There was just the quiet, anticlimactic whir of my laptop's fan. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen. Your petition has been successfully submitted. You will be notified when it has been reviewed. With a few simple clicks, the wheels of a great and powerful bureaucratic machine had been set in motion, a machine that was slow and methodical and utterly unstoppable. A machine that was now grinding its way, slowly but surely, towards Brenda Clark's front door. The weeks that followed were a quiet, nerve-wracking waiting game. The angry white envelopes from the HOA continued to arrive in my mailbox. I would see Brenda on her morning power walks, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. She thought she was winning. She had absolutely no idea that a far greater and far More binding authority than her little HOA board was currently reviewing a file with her name on it. I just tended to my garden, paid my irrelevant fines, and I waited. The notification arrived 4 weeks later. It was an email, not from the HOA, but from the official clerk of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Department. The subject line was Notification of Public Hearing, case hashtag Z-225-114. I opened it. My heart pounding. Dear Dr. Reed, this is to inform you that the petition you submitted regarding parcel ID number 04521116 has been reviewed by the planning staff. Our records confirm the zoning map discrepancy as outlined in your document. The case has been placed on the public agenda for the next Zoning and Planning Commission meeting. I scanned down the email, my eyes searching for the words I knew had to be there. And then I found them, as per city ordinance, a formal, certified letter of notification regarding this hearing. And the details of the petition has been mailed to the current property owner of record, Ms. Brenda Clark, at 112 Willow Creek Drive. I leaned back in my chair. The letter was in the mail. The fuse had been lit. The bomb was on its way. I imagined her walking to her perfect HOA-approved mailbox. I imagined her pulling out the crisp official envelope from the city. I imagined her, the queen of petty violations, reading a letter that informed her that her entire, perfect, rule-abiding life was, in fact, illegal. The battle of the garden was over. The war of the zoning map was about to begin. And she had no idea that I was the one who had just armed her executioner. The first sign that the bomb had landed was the sudden, deafening silence. For the first time in months, a Friday came and went, and no crisp white envelope from the HOA appeared in my mailbox. There was no new fine, no new threat. The silence from Brenda Clark was more telling than any angry letter could have been. The Queen had been checked, and she had retreated into her castle to contemplate the sudden, inexplicable shift in the balance of power. The second sign was the explosion of chatter on the neighborhood Facebook group. It was a post from my kind, retired next-door neighbor George. "Morning, everyone," he wrote. "I was just walking the dog and saw a new public notice posted. By the entrance sign, it's a notification for a city zoning commission. Hearing regarding the corner lot on Willow Creek Drive, something about a zoning map discrepancy. Does anyone know what this is all about?" The comment section immediately devolved into a flurry of panicked, confused, and wild speculation. A zoning hearing. In our quiet, perfectly planned subdivision, it was unheard of. I watched the digital chaos unfold from the calm, quiet fortress of my home office, a small, satisfied smile on my face. The first ripple of my bureaucratic tsunami had just hit the shore. The public hearing was 2 weeks later. In the cavernous and soul-crushingly beige public assembly room at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Government Center. It was a place I knew. Well, I had spent a significant portion of my professional life in rooms just like it, presenting my own projects to boards and commissions. But tonight, I was not a presenter. I was a spectator. I took a seat in the back row, an anonymous citizen in a sea of other citizens, my copy of the meeting agenda held in my hands. Brenda was there, of course. She was not sitting at the head of a table with a gavel. She was sitting in the hard plastic seats of the petitioner's section, looking small, lost, and utterly out of her depth. She was flanked by a slick-looking lawyer who had the distinct predatory air of a man who charges by the minute. She saw me as she walked in, and her eyes narrowed with a look of pure, venomous hatred. She knew. She didn't know how I had done. But she knew this was my fault. When our case number was called, I watched as she and her lawyer took their places at the petitioner's table. The chairman of the zoning commission, a stern-faced woman I had presented to a dozen times, looked down at them over her reading glasses. A junior city planner, a young man I had trained a few years ago, presented the official staff report. His voice was a dry, factual monotone as he laid out the undeniable bureaucratic truth. He recited the ordinance numbers. He showed the maps. He concluded, his voice devoid of any drama. Therefore, the staff finds that the property at 112 Willow Creek Drive is, and has been since 1994, officially zoned NC1, and its current use as a single-family residence is a non-conforming use. Brenda's lawyer tried his best. He blustered about the history of the neighborhood. He talked about the spirit of the community. He argued that the 30-year-old error was a meaningless clerical mistake. The commission was unmoved. The law was the law. The maps were the maps. The fact remains, counsel, the chairwoman said, her voice dripping with a weary impatience, that your client's property is in violation of the city's established and legally binding zoning code. The discrepancy must be rectified. Commission voted a unanimous decision to formally recognize the property as non-conforming. Then the chairwoman looked at my petition. The commission, she announced, also finds merit in the petitioner's suggestion that this parcel's zoning be re-evaluated in the context of the city's 2040 comprehensive plan. We will schedule a second hearing to determine the final and permanent zoning for this lot, with a staff recommendation to explore a higher density mixed-use residential designation. It was a complete and total rout. Brenda sat there, stunned into silence, as the commission moved on to the next case. A thrilling debate about the setback requirements for a new car wash. Her 30-year reign as the undisputed queen of Willow Creek was over. She had been publicly, legally, and bureaucratically neutered. The news of her humiliation spread through our neighborhood like a wildfire. The Facebook group was a glorious, chaotic mess of schadenfreude and rebellion. The woman who had built her entire identity on the rigid enforcement of the rules had been exposed as a rule breaker herself. Her authority had not just been challenged. It had been revealed as a complete and utter fraud. An emergency HOA meeting was called the following week. Brenda was voted out as president in a landslide of angry, resentful homeowners she had tormented for years. A few days later, she appeared on my doorstep. Her face was a pale, tight mask of rage. "Ah, you!" she hissed, her voice a low, trembling thing. "This was you. You did this." I did not invite her in. Ha! I just stood behind my screen door, a quiet, unbreachable barrier between us. "Not sure what you mean, Brenda," I said, my voice polite and calm. I simply pointed out a discrepancy in the public record. I assumed you, as a stickler for the rules, would want to make sure your own property was in full compliance with the law. "You have ruined me," she cried, her voice finally cracking. "No, Brenda," I said, my voice still quiet, still. "Calm your own arrogance ruined you. You picked a fight with the wrong person, and you used the wrong rule book. You have a nice day now." I closed the main door, leaving her standing alone on my porch, a queen with no kingdom. Month later, the final beautiful symbol of my victory appeared. A for sale sign was hammered into the perfect, green, and obsessively manicured turf of her front lawn. She could not afford the long, expensive, and almost certainly doomed legal battle to get a residential variance from the city. She had no choice but to sell her illegal house and retreat. The final perfect irony came a few months after that. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that the buyer was a small, independent developer. He had, with the city's enthusiastic approval, petitioned to have the lot officially rezoned to MX2. His plan was to build a tasteful, modern triplex on the lot, a building that would provide new, much-needed housing for 3 young families. Brenda's monument to exclusionary. Single-family home conformity was going to be replaced by a symbol of community and growth. It is spring now. A year after my war with the HOA began. I'm sitting on my porch, a glass of iced tea in my hand. My front yard is a riot of color, a beautiful, chaotic, and defiantly living meadow, buzzing with the happy, industrious sounds of hundreds of bees and butterflies. Across the street, the construction crew is breaking ground on the new triplex. The sound of their work is the sound of a new beginning. My revenge was quiet. It was bureaucratic. And it was absolute. I did not just win a petty argument about my garden. I had, in my own small, methodical way, permanently changed the landscape of my neighborhood for the better. I had taken the ugliest, most frustrating experience and, using the tools of my own trade, had built something new. Something better, and that, I decided, was a victory that would continue to bloom for a long time to come. The sale of Brenda Clark's house was the talk of Willow Creek Estates for months. It was a quiet suburban scandal, a story told in hushed tones over mailboxes and during evening walks. The tyrant had been deposed, not by a rebellion, but by the quiet, implacable force of a zoning ordinance. Her departure was a seismic event that shifted the very foundations of our neighborhood's power structure. The iron-fisted rule of the HOA, once a source of fear and anxiety, was broken. In its place, something new, something quieter and more collaborative began to grow. And it all started, as everything had, in my garden. A year passed. The ugly beige monument to conformity on the corner lot was gone, replaced by a handsome modern triplex that, while different, was designed with a tasteful respect for the neighborhood's aesthetic. The construction had been a temporary nuisance, but the result was a quiet, welcome change. The new building brought with it new life, new families. The oppressive, monolithic silence of Brenda's reign was being replaced by the cheerful, chaotic sounds of children playing. I was in my garden one Saturday morning in late spring, tending to my thriving patch of milkweed, when a young couple approached me from the new triplex, pushing a stroller. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice warm and friendly. "You're Dr. Reed, right, Evelyn?" "I am," I said, smiling as I stood up and wiped the dirt from my hands. "We're the Millers." "Jen and Chris," she said, gesturing to her husband and the sleeping baby in the stroller. "We just moved into Unit 1 over there. We wanted to thank you." I was taken aback. "Thank me for what?" "For this," Chris said, a look of genuine gratitude on his face. He gestured to the triplex, then to the neighborhood. "At large, we've been trying to get into this neighborhood for 2 years. Our son is starting school soon, and the elementary school here is the best in the district. But we could never afford one of the single-family homes. When this unit came on the market, it was a miracle. It was the only reason we were able to move here." He looked over at my garden. "We also heard you were the one who made the neighborhood safe for wildflowers again." I just smiled. I had been so focused on the quiet, personal satisfaction of my victory over Brenda that I had never truly considered the larger, positive, and very human consequences of my actions. My bureaucratic revenge had inadvertently created a home for this young family. It was a profoundly humbling and deeply satisfying thought. The HOA, in the wake of Brenda's spectacular downfall, had been completely restructured. My kind. Neighbor George had been reluctantly elected as the new president. And the board was now made up of reasonable, thoughtful people. The monthly violation notices had stopped. The neighborhood Facebook group, once a forum for public shaming, was now a place for sharing gardening tips and organizing block parties. The reign of terror was over at the next quarterly meeting held on a warm summer evening in the now much friendlier community clubhouse. George brought up a new piece of business. As you all know, he began, we have that large, unused, common area behind the clubhouse. It's a barren, useless patch of clay and weeds that costs us a few $100s a year to mow. He paused, a twinkle in his eye. It has been proposed by several residents that we stop mowing it and, instead, turn it into a community vegetable and pollinator garden for all of us to share. A murmur of excited approval went through the room. The board loves this idea, George continued. But none of us are expert gardeners. This project will need a leader. Someone with the vision and the expertise to guide it. He turned and looked directly at me, a wide, hopeful smile on his face. Evelyn, he said, his voice ringing through the small room. We were all wondering if you would be willing to lead the project. Every eye in the room turned to me. It was a perfect, ironic echo of the last meeting I had attended in this room, the one where all eyes had been on me as Brenda had publicly shamed me. But this time, the faces were not full of judgment. They were full of hope. They were asking. Me, the former neighborhood pariah, the rule breaker. To be their leader, I thought of my quiet, solitary garden, my private sanctuary that I had fought so hard to protect. I had started this journey simply wanting to be left alone. I had wanted to build a small wall around my life. But now, my community was asking me to tear down that wall and help them build something bigger, something we could all share. I looked at the faces of my neighbors. I saw Jen and Chris, the young couple from the triplex. I saw George. I saw a dozen other people who had stood up for me online and in person, and I knew I could not say no. My quiet, personal act of defiance was about to become a collaborative, joyful act of creation. I would be honored, I said. It is autumn now, a year and a half after I first brought my fight to the city. I am not in my own garden. I am standing in the middle of our new, magnificent, and thriving community. Garden? The once barren patch of clay is now a sprawling, beautiful testament to our shared efforts. We have raised beds overflowing with late-season tomatoes and pumpkins. We have a massive, chaotic, and beautiful pollinator meadow, a scaled-up version of my own front yard that is absolutely electric with the buzzing of happy, well-fed bees. I am not alone. I am surrounded by my neighbors, my friends. I am showing Jen and Chris's young son, who is now a curious toddler. The difference between a monarch and a swallowtail butterfly? George is proudly showing off a ridiculously large zucchini he has just harvested. A group of residents are working together to turn the soil for a new strawberry patch. The air is filled with the sound of laughter, shared work of a community coming together. I look around at this beautiful, vibrant, and connected world we have built together, and I realize with a deep and profound sense of peace that my true revenge was never the downfall of Brenda Clark. The destruction of her illegal house was just the necessary act of clearing the land. This was the real victory. This garden, this community, my quiet, solitary, and deeply personal battle had, against all odds, blossomed into this. My fight to protect my own small patch of wildness had ended up cultivating a much larger, more wonderful, and far more important. Garden of human connection. And as the warm, golden light of the autumn afternoon settled over all of us, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was a harvest that would continue to feed our community for a very, very long time to come.